Well, hello, everyone. As you all might know, my name is Tracy Livingston Howard. I am the co-founder of Liv.Lit, a coaching and training company focused on coaching high-growth CEOs to be a high-growth version of themselves. Please, for everyone that's here, please drop a hello in the chat box. Let us know where you're calling in from so we can see where in the world everyone is. You all might know that I live on the sunny island of Curacao in the Caribbean. I highly recommend you come and visit me. So I am thrilled to be hosting our third class of our 5-class series in the Liv.Aligned series. We're all focused on this topic of leading through crisis and how we can lead our companies and ourselves through the challenges that we're facing, through the conflicts, through the uncertainties and the unknowns, which are a given in life. We cannot avoid them. We cannot do everything perfectly to control everything happening in order for everything to work out. We've really got to become stronger, smarter, more creative, and learn a lot in order to be the best version of us, to be able to walk through that with grace and with the results we're looking for. So all of these classes are focused on learning and developing our own leadership skills to be able to do just that. Our class today is with Jane Tarrant, who I am going to happily introduce in a moment. And we're going to be focused on retraining breathing habits to reduce stress and increase performance. Now, please just drop a 1 in the chat box if you have done any learning or have any experience with breathing retraining. Just drop a 1 in the chat box if you do. Let's get a pulse on the crowd. And I thought this topic was so interesting when I met Jane, because we all breathe. I mean, we're all breathing right now, I can kind of assume. And we take breathing as a given, at least I did. I know sometimes that when I go for a run and I'm getting, that beautiful oxygen and the releasing endorphins, that I get connected to my breath and I feel good. I have that life force happening. But I've never learned, hand to heart, learned how to breathe, that if there could be a good or better way of breathing, and how my breathing impacts my performance in business, how it impacts my stress, how it impacts really every cornerstone in my life. And so when I met Jane and we talked a little bit about breathing, I thought we need to have a class on this topic, especially in leadership. A lot of my clients I work with hold their breath. And we'll get into that. Under stress, we can breathe shallow, we can hold our breath. Drop a 2 if that's you. If you're stressed, you could notice you're not breathing or holding your breath. And I do too. And I've noticed, well, what is that actually doing to me? But that's the first thing with clients. The second I notice is that, and I talk a lot about, is that our kidneys in our body, in Chinese medicine, are associated with our life force. So our kidneys in our body is how much life force we have. Do we have a beautiful, overwhelming spring of energy and elevated emotion and staying in high altitudes of how we think and how we feel and act? We all know when we're sick, our energy is low, and that is really a sign that maybe we need to rest, relax, take care of our bodies. And so for me, when I was thinking about the class, it's about how does our breathing connect with our life force? And can we have more energy, more life force? And what would that do for the results in our business if we did? So drop a 3 if you'd love more energy, life force, and to just be in kind of that peak performance or that flow state energy of really feeling alive and connected to what you do. Same here. Same here. So beautiful. So before I introduce Jane, I'd love for all of us to put our feet on the floor, as you all might have been here before. Drop your feet on the floor so that they're flat on the floor. Our kidney point 1 in acupuncture is at the bottom of our feet. So there's an intention for why we do this. It's right here. It's in the middle, top third of your foot. Now you can push this point if you'd like to. We can't see your hands. Unless you have a baby on you, you might not be able to bend forward. Angela has a little baby with her. That point on the floor actually helps us to be grounded. That kidney point is all about our life force going down through our bodies and out our feet, and then rising up through the earth into our bodies. So I'd ask you to have your feet on the floor throughout the class. And right now, take a moment to be still. Collect yourself into the room. There was lots of things you were probably just doing. Give yourself a moment of grace to happily push everything out of the room for a moment and just bring yourself in the room. You could say your name to yourself. You can say, hello, Tracy, or hello, your name. And I'd like for you to ask, what's my intention for being here? How come I said yes to joining this class? What do I want to leave with when I get off this class? What's my intention? What do I want? How come I'm here? Take a moment to ask that question. And I'd love for you to write it down on a pen and paper. What is your intention for joining our class on retraining breathing habits to reduce stress and increase performance? Just connect to your higher self for a moment. How come they want you here? And go ahead when you have that, drop it in the chat for us. Let us know why you're here so that we can support you to get your intention met. Melanie, taking a step out from the day-to-day to do something good for me. Great. Glad you're here. Glad you've stepped away and stepped into yourself. Michaela, I'm here to learn more about my own breathing and reduce stress and bring some techniques to your clients. Beautiful. Isabel, just slow down. Think of me, be balanced, increase my performance. Carrie, community and connection is so needed, always growing and expanding. Great. Jane, one step closer to a TEDx and spreading awareness of something I feel passionate about. Angela, better manage high emotion or stress moments to get back into flow. Marielle, being more grounded and aligned in my work. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Well, let's see and be able to work with all of you to get your intentions met. It's not passive. So please be active in your experience here on the class to be part of creating and getting your needs met. And so you all might know the flow of the class. I'm going to introduce Jane. We're going to do a little bit of a interview style Q&A so you can learn a bit more about breathing habits and her background. And then we're going to go into an exercise which you all will have so many takeaways from. So our goal really here is for you to experience this and not just learn. So it is my immense pleasure to welcome Jane Tarrant with us today. One step closer to your TEDx. Thank you so much for joining us, Jane.
Thank you so much for having me.
Jane is the founder of LiNK Breathing and lives in the United Kingdom. And she has worked with all types of people, from CEOs and leaders in companies, all the way down to moms and parents, to people who are really looking to understand how their breathing is impacting their quality of life, their well-being, as well as their performance in the work that they do. So please, Jane, let's kick off and let's hear a little bit more about you. So it would be great for you to briefly describe your professional journey and how you got into breathing retraining.
Absolutely. So it all started when I was 7. And I was literally sat on my floor, age 7, in my bedroom on my own, thinking, my nose feels too small and I can't breathe through it properly. But surely if that was a problem, someone would have told me. And I never did bother bringing it up with my parents. I never bothered to ask the doctor. I never sort of thought that it was my place to ask those questions. And there was no one at any point, through orthodontists, dentists, doctors, physios, chiropractors, everybody that I saw throughout my life, no one ever picked up on that I was a mouth breather, that I was an over breather, and that I was effectively living suboptimally because of those things, and that it actually was retrainable. So it took me till I was 30 to learn from a podcast that you could actually retrain your nose. And I was like, what? So straight away I knew, because I'd been looking for something for my own business that would work with my body, that would be something that I could feel passionate about. And I just came across this and I just never looked back. I almost set up the company straight away as I was starting to train, and I just wanted to delve in. I couldn't think of anything I wanted to learn more about than this thing that I'd wondered for most of my life. Having been a snorer as a child, having sort of had impacted face shape from it, and a lot of other things that we can kind of talk more into, as to where our tongue is, how we breathe, how we swallow because of that, and you know, the impact it has before we're 12 and then we're sort of set. So I then kind of went through thinking about how it had impacted me with sort of a panic attack when I was 12 for the first time, being sort of diagnosed with sport-induced asthma, even though actually I was just running for help and I was an overbreather who was then overbreathing with panic. And obviously that would bring on that breathless feeling, which then kind of gave me a story around that I was asthmatic, which I necessarily wasn't. And it was a lot of miseducation and misinterpretation. So for me, this was kind of the beginning of my journey in this space of finally finding some truth and finally finding some ability to relearn all the things that I'd sort of learnt badly or minimally when I was really young.
Wow. That's an incredible story as to how you got into what you were doing. And it was bringing me into my world, that I actually had a deviated septum, which is the cartilage inside my nose, like kind of that bone was twisting. And I've had a very small air passage, or the story. And actually my nose, I had to have not surgery on it, but inside to re-straighten that part of my nose when I was 19. And I always felt I couldn't breathe until that happened. But it's so, if anyone else is having their own story coming up about breathing, please just type a 5. Like you notice something about panic attacks or stress or your nose or breathing in her story. It's so powerful. Talk about, you mentioned breathing in performance, or breathing. We can first keep it on like a business level about our performance in our work. How does breathing impact that?
So it impacts, and I kind of go into the basic science of it just because I think it's the most fascinating way of doing it, but I describe it using completely non-scientific terms because that's much more approachable and a way that you can actually teach children as well, which is another passion of mine, to kind of empower those to empower others. So if we think about it from a basic sense, if we think about our lungs almost like a tree, we're breathing the oxygen in. Obviously, it's not just oxygen, there's other things, but we want the oxygen from the air down into the leaves of the tree. So when it gets to the leaf of the tree, we then have each leaf is kind of wrapped in the capillaries, so we can get into the blood. And in there, you've got little red buses. So they're called hemoglobin, but little red buses. And you imagine those little red buses driving from your lungs who've collected the oxygen up as passengers all the way around to your brain or your muscles. So whether it's cognitive performance, or whether it's sporting performance, or whether it's just walking to go and get your child from nursery, at whatever level you're looking at here, we want to make sure that we're getting oxygen to the brain and the muscles. Now, in an ideal scenario, we'd have, for example, like a motorway, and we'd have 3 double-decker red buses full of oxygen next to each other the whole way. And when they arrive, the reason why it is a motorway is because carbon dioxide, which is what we breathe out, is actually there as a dilator. It widens not only the airway, but also the blood vessels. And when it does that, it also has a second job to do before it's expelled from our body, which is to open the doors like porters of the buses that allows the oxygen to get off and actually enter your brain or your muscles. So if we imagine this in a very simplistic sense, we want that nice wide motorway, and we want lots of CO2 in our body. Now, if we're an overbreather, somebody who breathes too hard, too fast, too often, too shallow through your mouth, for example, or just heavily in through your nose, in this scenario, what we're going to do is we're going to plummet too much CO2 too quickly. And that will then narrow the road to a dual carriageway, or a 2-lane, depending on obviously American English, we use different terminology, but from a 3-lane to a 2-lane road. And when you do that, you're stacking a bus behind. So your delivery to the location in your body is slower, and then the CO2 is in less quantity, so there's less porters on duty to open the doors, so not all of the oxygen gets off either, and for the CO2 to then get back on the bus and drive back round to the lungs. So in that scenario, we're living suboptimally at the level of 2 lanes. Now, if you then feel quite stressed, you're about to go and do a talk for work, just as I was coming on here, I could feel me heating up. Although I'm not nervous, mentally, there's obviously a nervous system element to me where I was like feeling quite warm in my superheated double jumper, to which I decided to rip it off just in case. But, those feelings that we feel in our body are quite subtle, but our breathing will change. And that's why calming it back down again is so important. So when we get to that single lane, you're really not delivering it well, and you're really not it's not getting off the bus either. And most people think in breathing that we need more air, we need more oxygen. I don't feel I can get enough air through my nose. And so we go bigger and harder and faster. Now, the more we do that, the more we're narrowing. And so a panic attack, when most people are then gasping to breathe, actually we want to be doing the opposite. But that's totally counterintuitive to most of our education. And when we're in a scenario where we have been an overbreather for a period of time, our performance level is just going to reduce all the time. So you've got one where someone who could operate on a motorway can reduce down in a scenario, but then you've got someone who is always stuck at a dual carriageway, a 2-lane road, where they'll never access the feeling of the 3-lane road, because as soon as their CO2 level builds up, so as soon as they do sport, or as soon as they breathe more slowly and calmly, or go through one nostril, or hold their breath, it will raise up, it will hit a ceiling, and that will trigger your need to breathe. And it won't feel comfortable to not do that. So therefore, we'll always hit that barrier. And that is where, with very simple science, we can see that we need to be really well oxygenated in order to have that level of performance and to think clearly. And if we're also like parents that are woken up in the night multiple times, as I have been for the last few years, I swear the only thing that's made me still just about cope with life has been good breathing, whilst I've had really poor sleep, because we've got so little to go on. And when I did first have a child, I didn't breathe this way. I breathed the way I used to, and the difference is huge. Just walking to nursery, not feeling so tired, recovering quicker from colds, not losing my nose to a cold, lots of different sort of things that we sort of take for granted. But when you're trying to show up in your best for work, you need every little tiny gain you can get to keep that performance at the level you want.
I'm having so many ideas and breakthroughs as you're talking. And I think I'm trying to summarize. The biggest one I'm having is we've been missing half of the story. that there's so much conversation around oxygen, we're forgetting the story and almost the yin and the yang, that marriage between oxygen and carbon dioxide or CO2. And so if there's any takeaway, that people need to think about the CO2 levels in their body and honor that part just as much as the oxygen. And this is what comes in with peak performance. People think they have to do a lot and stay in this kind of over breathing, constant action, whereas actually rest and these other aspects of restoration must come into play if we're actually going to be in great performance. So you mentioned a little bit about the challenges of overbreathing, but what does this create? What symptoms does this cause?
So if I was to kind of say, well, who is an overbreather? You know, how would somebody know that they are? There's a few things to look out for. So really obvious ones are things like movement in the upper chest when at rest, breathing through the mouth, sort of any time really, whether it's day, night, sport, at a low level. High level sport, it's quite common that people switch no matter where you are, and extreme level you usually would, but it is possible to get quite far into sport without. If you're in a scenario where you're noticing it's loud, like my nicknames used to be Darth Vader, watching a film, or at night you might click, like I used to get called the Predator, as I click in my sleep with my sort of tongue reopening up, and sort of there's quite a lot of little tiny ways you can know from sort of noisy breathing and obvious breathing. And then the other side is things like anxiety on a regular basis. You know, there's anxiety that we all have, and then there's someone who's like, I am an anxious person, and that's usually linked to how they breathe all day, no matter whether they've been to a yoga class for an hour or whatever. And then you've got panic attacks, which is obviously an extreme level of that, and you've got the breathing issue plus a lack of empowerment, where you just don't actually know that you can only do anything about that. So that's really obviously fulfilling when we do get to work on that and bring that back. And then there's things like snoring. Most people just think it's normal. You know, probably 5 people here probably got a partner in their bed or themselves that snore, and yet this is something that we can retrain with. You know, effectively snoring is noisy breathing, where the tongue is untrained and falls back into the throat, and or the wind is really fast and flaps the flag, effectively making that noise. So if you reduce the wind, or you sort of tone up and strap down the flag, you can kind of reduce that noise that doesn't need to be there. But usually it's this increased wind at night that causes such a problem, because that actually exacerbates whatever issue you've got, you know, add it weight gain and things, it can get worse, etc. But these are things where we don't realize, and we often see these triggers with premenstrual phases and perimenopausal as well. They can really exacerbate. So this is a sign that you're probably already an overbreather, and then it gets that little bit worse and suddenly you notice a symptom for the first time. The other side is asthmatics. So it's not that overbreathing causes asthma necessarily. I don't have that sort of data, but it's more that asthmatics try so hard to breathe that they become severe overbreathers, and then they're badly managing the symptoms. They're relying on just inhalers, and they don't realize that actually they have control over how they walk and breathe, how they sit and breathe, how they sleep and breathe, and how much they're taking
Well, what
in.
I think is so important that I'm so important with this is that I love Western medicine, and I love, if I break my arm, I'm really happy if they kind of help to get that bone back together. So many of us are missing so much of our own personal empowerment for our own healing and our own growth, that rather than relying on other people, it's fixing us, that this is actually a tool where we can handle it ourselves. And it takes a big shift in our mindset to really believe that we can change our snoring. When we've been told a story or a narrative from the outside that it's due to these things, and well, you know, I want to really say that is so liberating to hear. And I know that people want to know, well, how do I breathe better, right? I mean, who here wants to know, how do I get more carbon dioxide in my body? How do I get the 3-lane highway? So how about we go into the how segment around the assessment? Can you talk about what we're going to do, and then how people here can participate with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to do an assessment with you, and everybody else can do it on themselves. So that's really nice. So we'll all put our hands on our bodies, and I'll show you where. And then during that, we're just going to notice. So You don't have to specifically watch, you can just feed into yourself, but I'm going to be obviously watching. And what you're looking for is to see what you notice. And at the end, we can kind of share some of that, or partway through, maybe we'll have a quick check-in and share it in the notes. So the first one is, Tracy, if you can actually stand up behind your chair.
Go to my position. Okay, so she's going to assess my breathing and talk me through it. You can watch, or you can go into yourself and do the assessment for yourself, whatever is best for you. But I'm going to be, and I have not done this before, so I don't know what we're going to do. So prefacing. Okay.
Okay, so we're going to put one hand on the upper chest, and everyone can do that if they want to. And the other hand, we're going to pull down. So the thumb goes in the squidgy bit just below where a bra strap would sit, or the split of the ribs. So it's actually got to be the way where you can really feel the movement. And then your little finger down towards where a man's belt buckle would be. So really rested down that hand. And you'll feel like halfway-ish somewhere down that hand is your belly button. So think of that as like an equator line. So you've now got those two hands, and that bottom one is really well spread. What we're looking for is there's 3 points. So the upper hand is point 1. You've got point 2 being the thumb, and point 3 being the little finger of the bottom hand. And what we're looking here is to notice, first of all, nothing to do with the hands, but it will help you get used to them. The first one is noticing, where's your tongue in your mouth? This is one of the most fundamental questions of breathing retraining that we don't even consider, where our tongue is. So first of all, is it 1 down in the bottom of your mouth, touching the bottom teeth? 2 with the tip up against the roof of the mouth, but the rest is hammocked down? 3 up in the roof of the mouth fully, so it's completely sealed against the roof, but touching the teeth at the front? Or is it in the roof of the mouth, but pulled slightly back with the tip against the roof of the mouth only and not touching the teeth? So those are the
okay, so hand to heart, which it is, my tongue at the tip was at the top, and then it was hammocked down.
Okay, cool. If anybody else wants to share theirs, they can with those numbers, but otherwise that's absolutely fine. So then you've got the next thing to look into. So as you keep your hands on, we're going to just notice where we feel the movement, because this is actually something that most people don't see and feel the same thing. So if you were looking in front of a mirror or a screen, you might notice it, or I might notice you move in a way that you don't feel. And what we're looking to see is if there any movement in the upper hand at all. Does it feel very vertical, lifting vertically, or is it very much it doesn't actually feel that bad, it's just there is movement? The thumb, can we feel that going out on the in-breath, so sort of swelling as the lungs go? Or is it inverting? Is it going inwards, being sucked in as your chest goes up? And then the third part is your little finger there. Can you feel any movement where you're sort of bloating out into the little finger from the belly as you breathe in? And just noticing for a moment until you've got that. Where can you feel it? Or is it a little bit of everywhere? Are you just feeling like you're just gently going? And it might be, some people will notice huge movement, like shoulders going up, tension, really lifting. And some people will notice like barely any breath, but they're not noticing it really in the central spot. They're noticing it kind of all over. So Tracy, what do you notice?
Okay, so I felt my top hand going out, almost like it would go forward like a ½ inch.
Yeah.
Or an inch or something like that. So not up, but forward.
Yeah.
The thumb, it didn't go in, it just kind of was rested there. Maybe it went a little bit forward and back, but it didn't go inside. Almost like it was just resting. And then I noticed that I was holding or squeezing my belly. I just also got over my period. So I might have just been habitually holding my right down here. So then when you said that, I let go of holding it. And then it felt like it moved a little bit.
Okay, cool. So that's the first assessment, and we'll come back to that in a minute to kind of go through what we should be looking for. And the next little assessment is pulling your hands to your sides of your ribs. So put them on your waist, then move them up, the thumbs behind your back. So splitting your thumb behind, like that's it. Yeah. So take your waist, then go above your waist onto your ribs. And we're looking to hold that. Now, whilst you're doing that, everybody can see your hands. What I want you to do is do what you think is a deep breath. And we're going to see whether those hands move or whether your breaths move up, basically, whether there's going to be that lift in the upper chest.
Okay, so my deep breath.
Okay. And then do what you think is a exacerbated sport breath. and notice again, does it lift? Does it go out? Does it do a bit of both?
It's like almost like a round circle. It goes like up and over.
Okay. And the last one is
And then I got a little dizzy.
And also notice,
Being
did you go
honest.
through the mouth, which I think you did on that one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I went to have mouth breathing.
And the next one is do what you think is a calm breath. Okay. Now, did anybody else notice the lift into the upper chest on all three of those? Not a huge lift, but there's still a lift. Yeah. So what we're actually looking for is the following, and I'll show you on me. So I've got stripes on purpose to actually help you to be able to see any movement or no movement. So this is what we call our D spot. And with our D spot on our diaphragm is here, and it plunges down as we breathe in and then goes back up again. It's attached all the way around. And then our ribs are just to either side of the diaphragm. So with this D spot here, when I'm just resting breathing, there shouldn't be any movement up here in the first on the top hand. And there shouldn't actually be any movement in the lower finger either. That's often something we learn through yoga. But here is just the D spot. And it should be quite visible. Now, if I was to do a deep breath, most people who are over breathers or upper chest breathers will do this. And then they'll go out through their mouth usually. Now, what we're looking for here again is breathing into the D spot. It's deep, not big. If I said a deep ocean versus a big ocean, you'd notice the difference. So and you can see the stillness of the upper hand. Now, if I do a extended sport breath, this is where the movement should go. Which for some people feels completely inaccessible, and for others, they've got some movement there. And if you imagine the shape of the lungs here, this is the bottom of the lungs, and we have a dead space of the tree trunk when nothing happens, a dead space of the branches when nothing happens. You've got some leaves up here, which is a bit inefficient. So we're doing a lot of movement as upper chest breathers into this space to then really have very little oxygen and CO2 transfer. But in the base, in this canopy, we've got very little effort for a hell of a lot of gain. So you can see from a performance point of view in that sense, it makes a difference. And then the last bit is here. If we're pulling in sideways, we're then filling really full into that canopy rather than doing sport breath. Where if we're getting to the point where we're going extreme sport breath, yes, we can go up as well. But if you're doing, for example, cycling, long distance, we're trying to keep that real rhythm. Pulling it down and out and slowing your breath right down can be a huge difference rather than that heave and dump, where actually we've got very little control over those muscles up there. And yet your D spot and your ribs can start to become really, really well controlled. So can you see the difference between where we naturally go? Because if we have any anxiety or any stress in our life, or we start to change our habits, they sort of degrade slightly where, you know, if you think about how do you slouch on a sofa, are you compromising that D spot from moving? How do you read your phone and send a text message? Are you sort of hunched over forward, sat at the kitchen table, and compromising that D spot? And so by opening the D spot and allowing that to work, we're then correcting posture. We're bringing a bit more awareness to the whole body. And then we're also thinking, well, actually, we're trying to pull down deep as opposed to lifting high. And so we're not exacerbating. If everybody tries to do a gasp for me, and notice where that went, and that went up. Now, if you're an anxious type breather all day long, how do you notice the first trigger of anxiety or stress? Because you're already in that muscle group. Whereas if you don't live in that muscle group, it feels really weird. And as soon as it goes there, you're like, ugh, and you work on it and you get back down again. So it's this conscious level, the stress point of this, where this is something we really need to combat, is if we are using the wrong muscles, we can't notice the trigger. And if you think about it, should be triggering here and we're noticing here, but we're not. What's happening is we're continuing to breathe past the trigger, And then we start to go, I'm starting to feel quite, actually, this is getting a bit much for me. I'm quite anxious, or I'm quite sort of, I'm feeling quite stressed now. And at this point, we start to step in, and we're that far away from a panic attack, or feeling like we're going to shout at someone, or feeling like we don't know how we're going to come back down. And so retraining.
Well, this reminds me of the mindfulness class we just had with Ariadne, and we're going to post that really what mindfulness is about having the stimulus, that experience, and then creating a gap. I call it mind the gap between the stimulus and our response. And so actually what I'm hearing too is breathing retraining is about minding it, being mindful and having a gap, and then actually consciously breathing, so that we're creating that highway, that 3-lane highway, where we're having the breathing that's facilitating the oxygen and the carbon dioxide to do that. I have some questions, but I actually want to open up to the group for a couple minutes before we go into closing. Y'all, what happened? What did you experience? What question do you have for Jane about breathing? Let's open up the lines and just jump right on if you have something you'd like to share or ask for Jane.
That's amazing. I was going to say the other thing about the mindfulness element and meditation. These are really, really powerful, and they should use them as much as you can. But don't forget that, do you know when to bring it in? That's if you change where you breathe, you feel the difference. Whereas if you wait until the trigger point, you can use mindfulness in that moment. But do we always want to be living on the edge, or would we like to be a little bit pre-prepared and never quite getting that far? And that's where, when we change how we breathe physically, it changes then how much we can tap into the mindfulness or other areas, and we get so much better access, and we can do it for less time. And that's one of the main things. I work with CEOs and lawyers and people who don't have the time, but I train them within a few seconds between here and the toilet, or on the staircase, because that is all the time they've got. But it's enough to work on it, so that you can step in, or just one breath between going from one meeting room to another. And that's the key that we want to get to, and not having to sit there for 10 minutes and meditate when we don't have the time.
Excellent point. Anyone want to chime in? Anyone want to share or ask a question?
I've got a question. So you mentioned about snoring at night, and I've noticed that there are certain times of the month, and I didn't know it was anything to do with menstruation or whatever, but I kind of breathe through. My husband complains that I kind of breathe not through my nose, but actually through my mouth. I kind of like that. Would that be to do with over breathing as well?
So yes, and also to do with the tongue not being trained. So that's something we'll finish on today, which is actually talking about where the tongue should be and something to go away with. But if your tongue is in the bottom of your mouth, for example, did anybody find it was in the bottom?
Yeah.
If it's in the bottom of the mouth, I'm going to do a snore for you. This is me snoring with the tongue in the bottom. This is me doing the same amount of air, but with my tongue in the top. That can be the difference for some people between snoring and not snoring with the same level of air. You add extra airflow in, and obviously you can have difference with actually snoring through the nose as well. So it depends on where you are on it, but just by training your tongue, you can actually get your nose working again for you, get that feeling not too small again. Even just having your tongue in the bottom and then lifting your tongue to the roof, you can actually notice an airway change. And we can train it to the roof of our mouth.
So we want our tongue at the top of our mouth when we're sleeping, for
exactly
potentially snoring, if it's a breathing related issue for reducing snoring. What about the canopy tongue?
In fact, we want the tongue at the roof of our mouth all day. Literally, you take it down to put food in your mouth, you put it back to swallow, you take it down to talk, you put it back to breathe in. So this tongue should be trained. If you all stood up now, it would probably drop out, even if you had it at the top. So
it's not about relaxing. It's not about relaxing the tongue, because that's like a limiting belief I just had that you just
so many mindfulness classes will say relax the tongue, relax the face, but actually the tongue is the thing that keeps your airway open more. If you relax your tongue now, Tracy, and you breathe with it in the bottom of your mouth, then you lift it fully. Yeah.
It like chokes me.
Exactly. So now say N for November. N.
And
The tip of the tongue will go to the roof of the mouth. Keep the tip
N.
there. Now lift the rest of the tongue up to the roof.
Mhm.
Now relax your face. Now breathe.
I
And
feel like I have
then
more air in my little nose.
exactly. So you open up the airway. And then the other thing is breathe through your nose, frowning. And then breathe through your nose, smiling.
Yeah, it's lifted.
Huge amount more air.
Also, maybe you send something after. My husband read about breathing retraining. Chris, you guys know him now, and he'll watch. And there was, I forget what society it was, but they trained their children to keep their mouths closed to breathe, and they have perfect teeth. You might know who this is. Perfect teeth. They don't have any teeth decay and all of that because they actually breathe with their mouths closed.
Yeah. So
Have you heard of this?
when we're waking up in the middle of the night with like dry mouth, bad breath, very simple fix of that is taping your mouth closed. But the only way you can tape your mouth closed, which I do, because my mouth seal isn't there anymore because my teeth are in the way. But the only way we can actually guarantee we can comfortably tape our mouth closed is to, one, know what to do in a panic attack and understand that we're in charge. Two, know how to decongest our nose if it gets stuffy, to actually use breath hold techniques to do that.
Yeah.
And three is to actually find that we can change our CO2 tolerance. So if we're working through half a nostril, we're still fine without going and ripping it all off. So we actually have an option of training that. And by training the tongue, we can actually change how we hold our entire face. For me, my face is quite slack-jawed because I developed in this way, because I was a breather through my mouth since a young child, and because I swallowed pushing my tongue forward, which is not where it should be either.
So I have so many other thoughts on this topic. Let me make sure we properly close on time, because I've got lots of things to share with you all before we go. First, just quickly, I'll put in the comments, what was the biggest breakthrough, takeaway, aha? What are you taking away from this class? Drop it in the comments. Let's just see where you all are. I'd love to hear your takeaways. Jane, thank you so much for giving your time and expertise and energy to talk to us about breathing retraining. What's the next step that people can do? When we get off this call, go back to our lives, what would you recommend as that one thing people can do here?
So I would recommend, if anybody really wants to know about the tongue, set yourself, I mean, I like to sort of say put post-it notes everywhere, but, basically try and have it. You're going to remind yourself, at different times of the day, in different parts of your home, on light switches and near the toilet and that sort of thing. Just put little notes around so it reminds you to check in with your end spot. So we have the end spot and the D spot, because we all know the G spot, which doesn't actually help us that much, but these two are really important. So we can remember them quite easily and use that reminder to really start to think about your tongue and just keep putting it back. And in about a week, you'll probably find it's starting to live there. Let me know. It'd be really nice to hear from you. But that's the one thing you can change today. And it's the one thing you can teach your children and your family members, that they can actually train their tongue, to help them train their nose, to help them train untrained snoring. It's the first stage. If anybody wants to go further than that, I do have an online course and I do private coaching, but the online course is a 7-week drip fed thing plus extra week for snorers for toning. And that does guide you through in handheld, if you want to fully go through the process and literally go, okay, I'm serious about this, I want to do it. And it's an interesting phase to go through, because it's something you can use for life and redo and redo and redo every time you get a cold or a COVID or fall ill with something. And
or your child drools like my child. So I'm like trying to get him to keep his mouth closed for starters. And then he's not allowed to have lollipops. It's just a mess. Exactly. So well, beautiful, y'all. When the replay's available, you're going to get the replay. You'll get all the links to the online course. And if there's anything that you need, Jane, while I'm talking, can you drop your LinkedIn profile here? You all should have it. Please connect with Jane on any of these things that she's offering. She's happy to drop you the link. Our next 4th Liv.Aligned class out of 5 is coming up on November 17th. So in 10 days. I am so excited to bring in my mentor and my good business friend, Glenn Miller. And he is going to talk about his from the hospital to business success on his terms. Glenn is the principal of MBG Finance in Canada, and he is going to talk how he went in 2008 from being sucked into the vacuum of busyness and overwork with his businesses to an ambulance stretcher, and how he made a single choice in his life to change his life. So from crisis to thriving, Glenn will inspire you. He is in a band and plays music. He does art, and he really is living life on his terms. You do not want to miss his story and life lessons. So that is coming up on November 17th. I truly hope to see you all there. And please be in touch for anything that you need related to today's class, and anything that you need from me as your coach and your business friend, wanting your success and your fulfillment and growth in everything you do. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and I'll see you on the next class on November 17th. See you later.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.